Solid STEM music indeed. Welcome to the STEMusic podcast, where we highlight multicultural STEM professionals and the music they love, providing valuable insights to emerging professionals in STEM. Today, we have a very special guest on the podcast. She comes from the S in STEM, so science. She holds a bachelor's degree in communications from Wichita State University and a bachelor's degree in meteorology from Mississippi State University. And she got them both at the same time, okay? She serves in her current role with more than 20 years of professional experience, including 10 years of forecasting severe weather in Kansas and Missouri. She has been recognized by the Kansas Association of Broadcasters for having the best weathercast in Wichita. She has earned the American Meteorological Society Seal of Approval, and she received an Emmy Award for severe weather coverage. She is also heavily involved in the greater Wichita community, visiting schools and organizations, sharing her passion for weather to the next generation. And finally, I watched her on KMBC 9 News when I was growing up in Raytown, Missouri. So y'all, this is really, really special for me. She is truly a legend in weather. STEM Music Nation, please help me welcome Emmy Award-winning Chief Meteorologist of the KSN Storm Track 3 Weather Team, Lisa Teachman, to the STEMusic podcast. Hello, Lisa. How are you doing?
Hello, I am doing great. It's a pleasure to be here today and to talk with you. I mean, you mentioned you watched me when you were what, knee-high to a prairie dog?
Probably.
That kind of makes me feel a little old.
I know, but you don't look it. You look
I
great, and you've done such great work. I mean, it really was special. We were chatting before we got on here live on the recording of the podcast of just, watching you growing up in Raytown, Missouri, which is where I grew up, and then coming here for college and, becoming a professional, working as an engineer, doing life, and then hearing the announcement that you were coming here to Wichita, Kansas to be the chief meteorologist. It just made me so happy. And I want to talk about that later on in the podcast, but I want to start where we always start. And that is, how did you get into STEM? So when you're thinking about you as a young child, a little girl growing up and saying, there's something about this science, technology, engineering, math, there's something in there that interests me.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
did that start for you?
Gosh, I think it started well before I was even born. Kansas has such a rich history, unfortunately, when it comes to tornadoes and tornado disasters. And in the 60s and 70s, my grandpa and also my great uncle Doug became some of the first storm spotters here in Kansas. And one
Really?
of the last things that my uncle Doug said to me before he passed away a few years ago was, Lisa, I want you to know your grandpa and I were some of the first. We were the originals. And when my dad, he was serving in the Marine Corps when he got out of the service and came back this way with my mom because he met my mom in New Jersey when he was in the Marine Corps.
Okay.
And he picked back up with storm spotting back in the 1980s. So I always had that I was growing up with. My dad worked at Cessna for the majority of his career for over 40 years. And anytime we had a severe thunderstorm warning or a tornado warning issued for Sedgwick County, he would clock out, he would get in his vehicle, and he would position himself somewhere around the storm and relay that information back to my grandpa, who was the radio officer. So my
Wow.
dad's amateur radio group worked specifically with emergency management here in Sedgwick County. And so I was always around that. But I never thought that I was going to get into meteorology. My sister was always the one that was out storm spotting with him. I was scared to death of storms.
I know that.
I
First of all,
was.
I know that's right, because that sounds very scary to be watching a tornado or getting close to it.
Yeah.
But this is in your blood. That's so
Uh-huh.
interesting. I love finding this information out. So okay, so your sister's the one going on the spotting,
She
the weather
was.
spotting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're scared of it. So what changed?
What changed? Well, I think it was probably divine intervention. There was a
Okay.
whole bunch of things that was being laid out that I didn't realize. Hey, do you see that this is happening? This is the path that you should follow. The first tornado that I remember as a kid was the Heston tornado. It was an early season outbreak that had happened in March, and I had gotten home from school and I was
Mhm.
outside jumping rope, and the northern sky was jet black for hours, and the tornado sirens started to go off. And I remember running back into the house saying, "Can we please go over to grandma and grandpa's house?" Because they had the basement in Hayesville.
Okay.
We didn't have the basement.
So you were growing up in Hayesville then. Okay.
Growing up in Hayesville. So
Okay.
I would throw all my Barbie dolls, all my Hot Wheels cars into a bag and say, let's go to grandma's house. But I remember that day we didn't go. And I think that probably started my storm anxiety. And then a year later, April 26, 1991, my hometown was hit by a tornado. It was
Wow.
the Hayesville, Southeast Wichita, and Andover tornado. That day, I did go to Grandma and Grandpa's house. I was stuck in the basement. And I remember my mom throwing pillows and blankets down in the basement. And I remember getting so hot and feeling like I was suffocating. But she was upstairs. She was with Grandpa. She was with Grandma. And my dad was out storm spotting with my sister. And my grandpa saw that tornado. My mom saw that tornado.
Wow.
And I that had to probably be the first time my grandpa had ever seen in his 60 some years of a tornado. And my mom remembers looking over at him and his jaw had just dropped. And I think it was reality hitting that this is hitting your hometown and what's going to probably follow after this. And I remember walking through the damage a few hours afterwards with dad and seeing kids that I went to school with on Willow Lane because that was where you had ground zero on the northwest side of Hayesville at the time. Willow Lane and Meridian, all
Mhm.
the homes were damaged. That tornado took out Cox Farms over at 55th and Seneca, went over to McConnell Air Force Base, and then it became more than a mile wide when it hit Andover, and the majority of the deaths had happened in the Golden Spur Mobile Home Park that night. But we didn't know what had happened in Andover because we were dealing with our own devastation in
Mm.
Hayesville. And here I was in fifth grade, and I still didn't think I was going to become a, a a meteorologist. And what's so interesting is that at that time, and even fourth grade, before that, Mrs. Stewart would always tell me, Lisa, I gave you your first gig because we were all assigned to do a newscast.
Oh, really?
And guess
Okay.
who the meteorologist was?
It was you.
In fourth grade. So that was almost like, here's
Wow.
another thing. This is what you need to do. And in fifth grade, I thought I was going to be an architect.
Okay.
I love drawing houses. I won a competition for drawing houses.
Wow.
And I was one of two students from Freeman Elementary that got the opportunity to tour KSN and meet Mike Smith, who was the chief meteorologist at that time, who started weather data. So where my weather office is now is where he had weather data. And I got to meet him. And I remember my mom got me this T-shirt that had a big tornado on it. And it said, Toto, I think we're back in Kansas.
Mm.
And it still didn't click that this is what I should be doing. And it finally took a drafting class in high school.
Uh-huh.
I hated the class. I did awful in it. I got an A in the class, but I realized this is not for me.
Mm.
This is just too stressful. But I love science. I love mathematics. I loved watching our news personalities in the 80s and the 90s. And since I had more of that science and mathematics background, I figured, why don't I just write to all three chief meteorologists in town and see if this is the path that I need to go down? And Jim O'Donnell had retired at Channel 10, and Ben Pringle took over for him. And he said, come in for a day and see if you like it. And I loved it. And then a month later, it was divine intervention. Dave Freeman wrote me back a letter that I still have from 1996
Wow.
that says, come in with your guidance counselor. We'll get you signed up for an internship. And that was it. 16 years old, a junior
Wow.
at Campus High School in Hayesville. And I started interning. And because of that, that paved the path for college. Because you mentioned, okay, you got the BA and you got the BS at the
Yes,
same time
yes.
in 4 years. How were you able to do
I
that?
was very curious about that. Like, first of all, I just want to say, like, this is such a cool story because you are learning and doing all of this at such a young age.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about community too, of people being willing to say, there's this young girl who's like really interested in science, in weather, in meteorology.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and pour into her. Let's go ahead
Uh
and
huh.
give her a shot. But also I'm so intrigued by your mindset at that age
Yeah.
of it reminds me of my love of airplanes. Like, no, no, no. I know that not everybody's caring about airplanes or whatever, but like
Uh
I
huh.
just love airplanes and I want to do something with them, you know,
Yeah.
and to see your excitement for weather because of everything that you experienced in fifth grade with the tornadoes and all this stuff. It's like, it's amazing to see that you grabbed onto that and said, okay, I want to do something to pursue it, but then also that the community and who would become mentors, you know, decided, yes,
Yeah.
we're going to give you, because that's so important, you know, to be able to have internships or experiences like that to guide you to say, almost like the drafting class, you know what, this isn't for
It
me.
wasn't for me. Yeah.
Or, wow, this is really for me. So
Yeah.
now you're interning. You said 16 years
16
old.
years old.
And so what carries on from that point?
I remember when I was looking at different colleges and I was thinking I was going to go to the University of Oklahoma.
Okay.
And my dad probably would have disowned me because my dad is an Oklahoma State fan
Oh,
instead
okay.
of a Sooner fan, right? Um, but then there was also KU.
Okay.
And KU would have been in state, OU would have been out state, but I was really drawn to OU. And Dave Freeman, my mentor, we were forecasting one afternoon and he stopped what he was doing. And I remember he put down his pencil and he looked at me and he said, Lisa, I want you to know about this program with Mississippi State. You could stay at home. You could get a lot of your credentials from Wichita State, transfer them to Mississippi State, take your Mississippi State classes. And by the way, you have four big brothers here that will help you out, that will mentor you while you're doing this. And I got a free ride to Wichita State. I was on academic scholarship, so I didn't have to pay anything there.
That's awesome.
And so I worked full time at the Derby Walmart and at the service desk, which I think prepared me in other ways in
Sure.
my career. And I paid for my college education all myself. So I had zero debt
That's
by the time I
awesome.
was done. I had 2 degrees from 2 universities within 4 years, and I was ready to go. But also, my parents, I mean, I knew that I wanted to go to college. My sister knew that she wanted to go to college. And my sister and I were both scientists. And for you to have two girls that are still scientists and that are still scientists after so many different decades, because there are women that will get degrees in the science, in one of the STEM fields, and then, life may happen and
Yeah.
then they pivot another direction. And for us to still be doing that is probably still highly unusual. But my mom always instilled in my sister and I, because back in the 60s, when my mom was growing up in the 70s, she graduated in 1970, women were really only expected to do one of four different career paths.
Mm,
And they're admirable career paths. It's a nurse, it's a teacher, it's a secretary, or a stay at home mom.
yeah.
And my mom really wanted to be a nurse. And somebody said, "You're awful at chemistry. You have no business being a nurse." And she always promised herself that if she had kids, and especially girls, she would never deter them from what they wanted to do.
Mm.
Well, she had two girls
Yeah. Yeah.
and she 100% supported us the whole entire way. She could have come to me and said, "You know what? You want to be on TV? Maybe that's not, you know, only few people get to do
Yeah.
something like
Yeah.
that. Maybe you should think of this." She never said that. Dad never said that.
I love
And
that.
and it was all about do what makes you happy.
Yes. And the support once again from your parents for both of you.
Yeah.
Girls, being Women's History Month, which is, why I was so excited to have you as a guest because I think you represent so well, women being able to go and chase their dreams, accomplish their dreams,
Yeah.
live life, balance many different hats, wearing different hats and
Uh-huh.
really going for it and showing the next generation, which we will talk about even later in this episode of the podcast of they can do it. They can
Yeah.
do it. And kudos to your mom for saying like, "Hey, this was a roadblock for me, but I'm going to make sure that if I have girls," and she was probably even thinking even if there are girls in the neighborhood, and
Yeah.
I can pour into them, I'm going to make sure that they know that they're limitless and they can do
Uh-huh.
whatever they put their mind to and that if they work really hard, which is what it sounds like too, that it wasn't just this thing about delusionally saying like, "Oh, go for the moon." It's like, okay, go for the moon, but there's going to be a lot of hard work
Yeah.
in the process and we're going to be with you every
Right.
step of the way. And
Right.
and I love that. I think that's amazing. So you end up, getting both degrees at the same time,
Yeah.
which is really admirable. Zero debt. Come on, STEM Music Nation. That's what we want, right?
Yeah.
Very powerful. And so one of the things that so here's a little nerdy thing about Roy Moy III, STEM Music Nation. In another life, I would be an anchor or
Uh-huh.
like someone like hello, my name is Roy Moy III, and welcome to KSN News tonight at 7 p.m. Like there's something in me that loves. I think it's also connecting with people in the community,
Yeah.
communication,
You know you
updating
can still
people.
do this, Roy,
don't
right?
don't tease me with the good time.
Right?
But yeah, and I think I get some of that out by doing the podcast too. I think that
Yeah.
that's why I get so much joy from this because there is a component of that work in this. But uh, you then graduate. Okay, you're
Yeah.
being mentored. You have both of the degrees. What is that first step? Because you kind of been doing an internship since
Yeah.
16 years old,
Yeah.
right? What was that first step? Because I guess the thing I follow anchors too. Like I said, I'm a little nerdy. I had a friend in college who that was originally her dream. Ended up not being what she pursued, but I got so into it. She was like an anchor at Wichita State
Yeah.
University, and so, I love following the path of, anchors on Instagram. So there's some that I met one a couple weeks ago. He was here, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, he's here." So I went up and said hi, so I do follow the journey, and a lot of times it doesn't start out as chief meteorologist.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to take us on a journey of, okay, you graduate, you're fresh out of college, you got these 2 degrees, but what how does that journey start? What happens to get you on the journey to where you are now?
If you go back about 20, 25 years, when it came to women in our industry, usually they would only have one woman per
Mm,
weather team. And then they would choose, what kind of woman do I want that to look like?
mm,
And September 11th also happened my senior year of college.
wow.
And a lot of TV industry jobs dried up, and it was even more difficult to find that first full time job. I also got married a month after I graduated college,
Okay,
and my husband had served a mission, and so he was a couple of years behind me. He was getting a degree in electrical engineering from Wichita State.
okay.
He also was on full academic scholarship. But the first paid gig that I got was at KSN, and it was months after I graduated. It was doing weekend morning cut ins, and I was paid $65 per shift.
Wow.
$65 per shift. So I was essentially a part timer. My husband was also part time. We were living off the money that we had had of excess scholarship
Sure.
stuff. But we knew that as time would go by, being a newly married couple, things happen. You need to have that medical insurance, that
Yeah.
dental insurance. And so I kept looking for that one job that I could be the sole breadwinner while he finished school. And Wichita was not the place that you would walk right into a full time job. You had to go someplace else. You had to make your mistakes. You had to learn in order to come back this way because Wichita is the severe weather Super Bowl of the whole entire country. It's us, it's Kansas City, it's Oklahoma City, it's Dallas, it's Omaha, Springfield. These areas have the best meteorologists in the whole entire country because you have to know your stuff.
You hear that, STEMusic Nation? We are not just sitting with anybody.
You
And
have to know
actually,
your
you
stuff.
saying that right now in this moment, I'm like, wow, I didn't even think about it
Yeah.
that way. Because
Yeah.
you're just thinking I'm watching the news and seeing the weather, but it's like just like in every industry, just like in every, like the Super Bowl of whatever it is, every industry has that. And
Right.
and wow, that's a
Right.
really
Right.
interesting way to think about that.
And so the first full-time job that I was offered was at WSAZ in the Huntington, Charleston, West Virginia market.
Mm,
Now, 6 degrees of separation.
okay.
Dave Freeman also worked at that station once upon a time.
Oh,
That was the station he realized he didn't want to do sports anymore and became a meteorologist. And he went
wow.
through the Mississippi State program because he was doing sports, loved it. But the meteorologist that evening got sick on her dinner break and couldn't do the evening newscast. And so the news director said, Dave, you're going to do the weather. And he said, I don't know anything about weather. And the news director said, too bad. Get up there and do it. And
Wow.
he got up there and he loved it. And he's like, I probably went over my time, but I had such a great opportunity with that. And he realized this is what I want to do. So even though when you say, well, the anchor, you're never too old to
True.
change gears
This is true.
and do something like that. So if it's something that you're passionate about, something you want to do, by all means, go for it. Go for it.
Lisa Teachman about to have me being an anchor on the news. No, I mean, you're absolutely right, and I'm a person who really lives by that fundamental of it is never too late, and if you
Yeah.
truly wanna do something, one, as a previous, podcast guest was saying, like, get good at it,
Yes.
get good at it, do
Uh
the
huh.
work, which I'm sure he probably had to do once he
Yes, he
found
did.
that out and figured that out, but yeah, I love that, and that is crazy that one, he's at Mississippi State, and then he's there at the same station that you get this offer. That is really wild
Yeah,
to me.
it is really wild how we crossed paths there. And then I stayed there for a couple of years. My husband graduated with his degree in electrical engineering. We moved across the mountains. I worked in Baltimore. My
Okay.
husband worked in Fairfax, Virginia. So we live
Whoa.
between Baltimore and DC. And
Okay.
you've been out there. You
Yes,
know how
yes.
busy it is. And even 20 some years ago, it was busy and it was expensive to
Oh,
live out there.
yes.
And we didn't want to continue with that for much longer. And we wanted to get back closer to family because all of our family was here in Wichita. It's my mom, my dad, and my father-in-law. And so we kept pushing to come back this way. And I think Ross over at Channel 12 tried to hire me a time or two, and it
Huh.
just didn't work out for my husband. And so I wound up at KMBC in Kansas City, and I almost didn't get the job. I almost didn't get the
Okay.
job. When I started, everybody kept saying, Lisa, I'm so glad that you were fought for this position. And I was like, fought for this position? What happened? So I
Mhm.
pulled the chief aside and he told me the story because there were two women that were interviewed for this position, and the news director wanted another person, but the chief wanted me because we were both given a weather test,
Yeah.
and according to him, one passed and one failed. And so the news director came down, wanted to hire the one that failed, and it turned into a full blown fight.
Wow.
And Larry Moore, who was the main anchor at the time, heard about the fight and said, let me look at both of these applicants and let me see." And Larry Moore looked at mine and said, "You know what, Lisa is the right one." So that was how I got hired at
Wow.
KMBC.
That's amazing, and I think you're giving us a little nugget too, because I don't think, it's probably regular in your world, but that there's a weather test. I mean, that makes sense,
Yes.
but, like,
Oh,
there's
I
a
give weather tests too
okay,
in three
okay,
different areas when you're coming
okay,
into Kansas. It's your general meteorology,
okay,
it's radar, and it's severe weather. Those are three
okay.
incredibly important areas. And I want
Yes.
to see what you know.
Yes, that's such an interesting insight. I love it because it's like, yeah, I mean, we just watch many people in the world just watch the weather, not knowing what all goes into it and all of
Yep.
that stuff. So it's that's helpful
Yep.
because we want to make sure that they know what they're doing and that sort of thing. And I think it's also helpful to know because so many of people who do not understand the weather are like, "What are you doing? Why are
Uh-huh.
fussing and all that stuff?" It's
Yeah.
like, no, these
Yeah.
people have to be very qualified to take tests in order to get up on television and do that. So that's really interesting and cool. So then you're fought for, you come,
Yep.
you're there, and
For
so
6.5 years.
for 6.5 years, cutting your teeth,
Yeah.
gaining your skills. What was that experience like in your career?
I did a lot of storm chasing when I
Okay.
worked at KMBC. I was there 2.5 hours after the Joplin tornado happened. And
Wow.
there are still things that if I smell certain smells, I'm
Wow.
instantly transported to what I witnessed there at that time. And I'm a firm believer that God gives you what you can handle. And I think it was Mike Bettis when he was with the Weather Channel. He was there when there were basically bodies in the street.
Mm,
And I did not face that when I got there because I don't think I could have handled that at that
yeah.
time in my career. I don't even think I could handle that now.
Yeah.
And we didn't talk a lot about post-traumatic
I
stress
was getting ready
disorder.
to I was getting
We
ready
we
to
didn't
ask
talk
that,
about that
like,
then.
in the news, whether you're an anchor or meteorologist and you're out there, yes, how do you manage that? Because I think that's the one thing I probably would struggle in the sense of, like, because 'cause I'm like, "Oh, yeah, they're on TV and they're
Yeah.
communicating and giving the
Yeah.
news," but these are real things that we just watch once again. We're just watching the news, and then we click it off and we go to bed, and we're living
Uh-huh.
our life, but you are out there in the field, especially at this time in your career.
Yeah.
How does one manage that?
You compartmentalize. You
Mm,
put it into a box and you're like, I've got a mission that I've got to do. We were getting yelled at by the people that were there, and I completely understand it. You're setting up your live shot for the
yeah.
10 o'clock broadcast, and they're yelling, "Get out of here, get out of here. We don't want you here." And yet you've got other people that you can clearly see they're in shock. When we went to a motel that night just to get a few hours of sleep, I remember talking to a guy in the office, and he has this glazed over look in his eyes. And he was on one of the higher floors of his apartment complex. And all he kept repeating over and over again was the the doors just kept knocking, and I just held on to my family, and the doors just
Mm,
kept knocking and knocking. And you realize what people have gone through in
yeah.
in this moment, and you're there to let other people know across Missouri, across Kansas, across the whole entire world what these people have been through, what they're going to continue to be through. And these people need aid. These people need
Mm.
assistance. That's why the media is there afterwards. It's not to get into somebody's face. I look at it as I want people to know what these people are going through and that they need our help.
I love that. I'm so glad you said that because I think, of course, on social media, you're gonna find all kinds of craziness, but
Yeah.
I think it's just really good to hear that coming from someone who is working in the news and has worked in the news and has been in those disaster areas to provide a different perspective for people who may feel that way about why is the news just setting up and shoving a mic in someone's face and stuff. I'm thinking about the LA fires that happened recently, and
The floods in the
yes,
Carolinas.
in the Carolinas,
Yeah.
hurricanes that have hit in Florida and other places, and tornadoes to your point, Andover,
Yeah.
a couple years ago, and so it's really, really nice to hear that perspective of, hey, we're trying to make sure that people are getting the help that they need. And I saw that because of one of the most recent things was the LA fires of you're seeing all this craziness on social media, but I started to see the posts of like, oh my gosh, because of this report, this child was found. Because of this report, so and so
This
got out the
dog,
house.
this dog, remember the
Yes.
story about the dog? He's like, I came running home from work and I can't find my dogs. I can't find my dogs. Then he later found one of his dogs. He called out and it crawled underneath
Yes.
that fence. And so it's giving a voice
Yeah.
to the people that are impacted and telling the truth as to what's happened to these people. The flooding, when it comes to the fires, it's about us working together and helping to get people back on their feet. And if you don't have the media there telling these stories, are you really going to know?
Yeah, that's so powerful and so good. I love having this other perspective
Hmm.
to kind of speak out. One, to just share, for anyone who's ever been interested in that, but two, for yes, I'm calling out the haters. That you are out here really trying to help people and tell
Yeah,
people's stories, and care for them. And also, I mean, just aside, we're gonna get to your community involvement a little bit later, but news teams and weather teams are also out in the community doing things like in
yeah,
general, not in disaster times. So
absolutely.
it is a very community focused and integrated effort. But I think another thing that you said too was that there was a mission, right? And so when I'm thinking about, wow, how tragic these events are, but that the mission is kind of what is allowing you to go forward and compartmentalize
Yeah,
it. But to your point of the post traumatic stress
stress.
disorder that you are going to have to experience. And so how have you managed that, in the post, maybe a year after or a couple months,
Yeah.
after?
I think it's just more being with my family. You realize what truly is important in this
Mm,
lifetime,
yes.
and you try to get as much rest and you try to take care of yourself as much as possible. When we had the tornado a couple of years ago, it was the Southeast Wichita Andover tornado.
Mm,
And remembering the April 26, 1991 tornado, it was again where you're compartmentalizing. You see on your Skyview camera, you see that tornado, you see it's churning up earth, it's tearing up people's homes, their livelihoods. You're wondering, is anybody hurt? Is anybody dead because of this tornado? And you're trying to provide the best coverage that you can to make sure that people are staying safe, and you let people know what has happened in the minutes and the hours
yeah.
afterwards. And I remember a moment when I turned it over to the news side to let them handle their thing because the weather coverage had pretty much ended. Miss Shirley, who runs our teleprompter, she's worked for KSN for over 40 years.
Wow.
She's absolutely wonderful. And I remember walking into the prompter room and I cried
Mm,
for a few minutes. And that was me
releasing. Yeah.
letting it out at that moment because you think about the people that are being impacted by this and it's like here we go again. So, I saw this over 30 years ago and here we go again. And then you dry up those tears and then you get back on TV again. So I did have a moment after that tornado hit that it just kind of came flooding out, and she just gave me the biggest
Oh,
hug ever and she says, "You're doing good. You're doing good."
oh
And
wow.
then you get back out there.
God bless her. And
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that insight too. It's very vulnerable, to showcase that, hey, this is what happens sometimes behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Even for someone who's so experienced like you, but you're human,
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing too, is like, newscasters, meteorologists, they're human just like us.
Yeah.
So really, really great stories. And I love how you're communicating that. I want to ask about more day in the life, chief meteorologist, and how you kind of even were able to get to that
Yeah.
position.
Yeah.
But prior to that, just a plug for all the weather people out there. What is it that you want people to know when there is these national or natural disasters, flooding, hurricanes, tornadoes specifically here in the Midwest? I know when I'm always watching, they're giving those in real time, but I don't know. I'm just giving a plug for all those out there who do weather like yourself, to let people know what to be doing in those situations,
Right,
right?
right. And of course, with our phones, everybody has an app that comes with it. Make sure that you have an app, one that you trust.
Okay.
Like our app, the Storm Track 3 weather app, is done by us meteorologists. And we input that data. and it comes from an actual source. It's not coming from a computer
Mm.
because people will throw up an app and they'll say, hey, it says it's going to be this, or we're going to see this much snow. And it's like, please don't make me debate another app. Just download ours. And you know that it
I know
comes
that's
from
right.
from a degreed meteorologist
Yeah.
who has the instinct and the intellect of this area, not some computer that's going to
Yeah.
be off who knows where, that's just turning out those numbers and just doesn't have that instinct and the intellect of those that have lived here. Because the longer that you live and you work in an area, you're going to be able to pick on those things that this model has this bias or this model has this bias, and you're going to create an even better weather forecast. So that would be the first thing. Make sure
Okay.
that you're being weather aware days in advance.
Yes.
That April 29th, 2022 tornado, we knew 4 days
Okay.
before that tornado struck that it was going to be a day that we needed to be weather aware. And so if you're making your plans days in advance, okay, maybe I'm not going to go to that track meet that night.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm going to do this instead. I'm going to stay closer to home. So that way you have your severe weather preparedness plan all ready to go and you're ready to put it into effect. So that way we can stay safe. We have so many more tools that are at our disposal now, from the WIAs on our phone, the wireless emergency alerts, to the
Okay.
weather
Yeah.
apps, to the way our tornado warnings are done here in Sedgwick County. You go back 30 years, and it used to be all the tornado sirens would sound within that tornado warning in Sedgwick County. Now the polygon comes out, and it's only for those specific tornado sirens within that. So
Okay.
if you're within the polygon, you'll be alerted to this. I think if I would have had that 30 years ago, I wouldn't have had the storm anxiety that I had
Sure.
had as a
Sure.
kid. And so there's still so many people that suffer from storm anxiety now. And I think the more that you understand and you learn about storms, that it helps you overcome that. And I think that was another thing that helped me overcome my storm anxiety, just learning so much more about the weather.
That's powerful and that's helpful too. Just
It
in
is.
general, anything anxiety that you may have about whatever topic. Like I love that. That's a nugget right there.
Yeah.
Learning more about it to help ease that
Mhm.
anxiety.
And
Yeah.
and then of course finding your trusted weather source. I work with a team of dedicated meteorologists that will
Mhm.
be there around the clock
Shout out to
to
Ronell.
Ronell.
He's already been on
Yeah.
the podcast. I watch him every morning. Back to what you said earlier, the cut-in. So I actually know because of the podcast with Ronell, watching the Today Show on
Uh-huh.
NBC, and then there's a cut-in. Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods from Al
Yeah.
Roker, and
Yeah.
then boop, there's
There's
Ronell, and he's
Ronell.
talking about the snow in Goodland that was happening today that we're filming. So
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
those are the cut-ins. But yeah, so finding that trusted team. I think too, one last thing in this area for those specifically because we're in Wichita, Kansas, and many people watching this will be, in Kansas or in the Midwest area, um, for a tornado, what are the things that you need to have, do, basement, no basement, like what? And then we'll move on. I promise the Music Nation, but I'm trying to help you out. She got all the tea. She got all the information. So what should be tornadoes coming? What should you be doing?
Well, you should already have your safety plan ready to go. Where are you going to go? Think about the places. You want to put as many walls between you and that storm as possible.
Okay.
The house I grew up in, if we couldn't get over to grandma and grandpa's that had the basement, mom would take us into the bathroom.
Okay.
She would take a mattress off the bed. But I also tell kids nowadays, if you only have seconds, to grab three things: a pillow, a blanket, and your shoes. And that pillow you're going to use to protect flying debris from your head, the blanket for your body, and the shoes, that's going to be because if your house gets hit by a tornado, you don't want to walk over nails, all that kind of stuff. So you want to make sure that you protect your feet. People in the Greensburg tornado, they were in their basement and they were trying to reach around for any shoes that they could because they knew they were going to have to climb out of that basement. And that's the kind
Yeah.
of stuff they would be walking over.
That's
So,
really
so
good
those are the
advice.
three
Yeah.
things.
Oh, that's powerful. No, that's
Yeah.
the Music Nation. I feel like we're prepared now.
Yeah.
Also, let's get a zoom in on these shoes. Speaking of shoes,
Yeah.
like you wore some really cool shoes today, and I was gonna find a way to figure out how to talk about them. And so you mentioned part of those three essential things to just think of if you only have seconds. I love that, by the way. I've
Uh-huh.
never heard that
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
So that's really, really good and empowering.
These are my radar shoes.
Your radar shoes, they're very cool. Tell us a little bit about those shoes.
Yeah, there's a debris bowl, I think, too, but it's radar reflectivity. We look at radar. Radar is like an X-ray of the storm. If you've ever broken something, or you have something going on in your lungs, they take an X-ray to
Yeah.
see what's going on underneath the skin. We're taking a look at what's happening with these raindrops. Where do we have twisting of the winds? And we're looking at that up in the atmosphere. And so with Doppler radar, we've been able to make more accurate tornado warnings and severe thunderstorm warnings to help keep people safe. So these shoes are nice and colorful, and kids are like, "Oh, they're so cool," and everything. And I also have to give a shout out to the Pratt Historic Movie Theater because they love these shoes when I went to visit them, and I told them that I would get another pair, and I did, because they think that it helps to encourage other kids to follow STEM careers.
I love it. And that's why you're on the podcast. That's why you're here today. I love that. I think it's such an effective way to create excitement. And you're not even saying anything yet, right? You're just walking into a room
Just walking in
and
the room.
kids and people, myself, I'm like, what? Those are really cool
She's
shoes.
wearing a dress, and she's wearing these radar shoes, but
Very
no,
cool.
they
Very
are.
cool. Well, thanks for sharing that and those tips once again. I think that's so helpful.
Mhm.
Great nuggets to take away. So, becoming the chief
Yeah.
meteorologist for a station, how does that happen? It probably was a huge goal on your board of things you wanted to get, and reach and accomplish. And it happens in STEM Music Nation. For me, it was very special because I came to Wichita, right? Grew up in Raytown, watching her on KMPC 9 News with Brian Busby and the rest of the team. And then I'm here and, living life after college, post college. And next thing I know, I see an announcement, Lisa Teachman. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's
Yeah,
coming
yeah.
here and she's going to be the chief. Like, this is so cool. So, how does that happen?
Again, I think it's divine intervention. I think it was a path that I was always meant to follow, but I didn't realize my true potential. I worked at KMBC for about 6.5 years, and in TV, it's not always peaches and cream. It's
Mhm.
not. And for whatever reason, my contract was not renewed. I was given a 3-month extension and said, "Hey, we want to use these next 3 months to see what else is out there and what may fall in our lap, and we think you should do the same thing." Then I got a 2-month extension, then a 1-month extension, and then I was told I was done. I didn't know if I wanted to take that first 3-month extension. I was living in Kansas City. My husband had a great job. I was close to family here in Wichita, and I didn't want to leave. I thought I was living my dream. I I my work ethic, I could work circles around anybody. I really
Mhm.
could. But for whatever reason, I don't know what had happened. I just think that it was probably God saying that you need to, I've got something greater for you.
Wow.
And I remember praying, saying a prayer when I drove on 69 highway to accept that first 3-month extension. And when I said amen, a sedan passed me with a personalized Kansas license plate on it. And do you know what that license plate said?
What did it say?
Meant to be. MINT to BE. And then I passed it, and then it passed me again. And it was almost like God saying, "Do you see this? Do
Wow.
you see this?
That
There's
is
there's a
that's
purpose for this."
that's so like God. That's so like
It
God. And
is.
I
It
thank
is.
you for sharing this because I guess for me in my life, and like I said, I never put religion or faith on anybody, but for me in my story, in my life, I feel like that happens all the time where it's
Uh-huh.
like, no, if I'm praying for something and he is going to actually send something in
Yeah.
this real world, not like
Yes.
I gotta dream it up or no, he's gonna send something,
Yep.
somebody, a sign. That is
Yep. Yep.
meant to be.
And the thing is, God will throw you bones along the
Yeah.
way, and it's up
Yeah.
to you, to say, "Hey, am I gonna grab onto this bone and I'm gonna take and roll with it?" And the chief position, I think, was one of those where I was getting a bone. But what had happened was I interviewed in St. Louis, I interviewed in Orlando, and none of those positions seemed right. It would have taken me farther away from
Yeah.
family, and family is greatly important.
Yeah.
It is. At the end of the day, family is everything. And so, I went on unemployment, and 2.5 months later, I walked across the street to KCTV 5 in Kansas City,
Mhm.
and I became a better person mentally, physically, and emotionally. And I think that whole entire event taught me that don't let it get you down, because there's a greater thing that's going to happen to you. You may not see it at the time,
Yeah.
but you will see it eventually.
Wow.
And I work with some of the best people in the business at KCTV 5 that I'm still friends with. And that was a placeholder, because what, 3.5 years later, one February afternoon, I got a call from Dave Freeman. And if Dave's calling you at 2 in the afternoon, you're like, "Are you okay? Did something happen?" I mean, your heart sinks. You're like, "Did
Sure.
something happen to Dave Freeman?" And he said, "Kiddo," and he always called me kiddo. He'll still call me kiddo to this day. And he said, "I'm going to announce my retirement in 5 days. And nothing would please me more if you could come back and fill my shoes. Could you do it? Could you come back to Wichita and build your legacy. I've been watching you for years, and
Wow.
I think you're ready. And I moved heaven and high water with 2 lawyers to get out of my contract in Kansas City so I could be right here with you today.
Wow.
And
That is
that's I
incredible.
didn't think that it would happen, and then one day they said, "Hey, you you cut a check for this amount, you're free to go." And my husband was so amazing. He said, "If I have to give back every single penny of that contract out of my 401k for you to take this opportunity. My sister supported this opportunity. Her husband supported this opportunity. Mom and dad did too. And dad said, if you come back, you're going to have your work cut out for you, don't
Mhm,
you?
mhm.
Coming back to Wichita." And I said, "I know, Dad." And I cut that check and I walked out. And I remember we loaded up all the dogs into the car. And when we drove down to Wichita, there was a tornado warning for Sedgwick County. So I think it was probably just
Wow.
it was meant
That's
to
an
be.
incredible story, and I thank you for the transparency and just showcasing because, once again, people are watching and seeing chief meteorologist, but another guest of mine, we were talking about this, that there's so much struggle and so much work, hard work that
Yeah.
happens to get to said place. And a lot of times there is that divine intervention for our lives. It's God saying,
Yeah.
look, these are the breadcrumbs. Look, this is the sign, all of the different things. And there is some intervention that helps the thing happen,
Yeah.
whatever that is for anyone in their life. But it is so amazing to hear about the perseverance through the valley of shadow of death. It's like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like
Yeah.
I'm sure you're talking about it now and you're sharing it, but I'm sure in those moments it's like, okay, God, what are we doing? Like, what's going on? Like, why am I in this position? But to still continue to push forward and then to hear the support from your husband and your family of them believing it's one of those things I think about in life all the time. Like, make sure that your inner circle is a good inner circle
Yes.
because they understood the calling on your life.
Uh-huh.
They understood the gifting and what it is that you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And they believed enough to say, hey, if you want to make this decision, we are going to back you. Ah, I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So STEM Music Nation, get that inner circle together that supports you in the way that she just described. That is powerful.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. I want to pivot, quickly to the community aspect of things. I kind of touched on it earlier because I know you have a huge passion. I think the other thing too is being at the McConnell Air Show. This is fall of 2024, I believe,
Uh-huh.
and seeing you in the hangar again. I think I had seen you at the other one too in
Yes.
2022.
And then the
Uh,
one prior to that in 19, I think it was.
okay, yeah, I mean, because I love my airplane, so I'm always going to
Yeah.
be there. And
Yeah.
so being in the same hangar, doing my little STEM music show in the corner, and you all having the table and taking pictures and greeting everyone, and calling me out and saying, "Hey, when are we doing this podcast?" Which I appreciate. But it just showcased your love of the community, and your passion. I also follow on Instagram and all that stuff, so I see. But what is it for you? Why is it important for you to give back in that way? And just tell us a little bit about the work that you are doing in the community.
It's really important to make sure that we're educating the next generations so that way they can not only stay safe, but they could also carry on the torch of because one day I'm not going to be here. I've had great mentors before me from Dave Freeman to Mike Smith, who was the chief before Dave was, and John Davies and his wife Shauna Davies. They're researchers and storm chasers, and they've been able to mentor me as well. And I want to make sure that that continues too. Or if I could just talk to a little girl who's 8 or 9 years old and she doesn't know if she wants to do this, she doesn't want to do that. Um, you know, Maybe she has these outside sources saying you can't do this, like my mom when it came to being a nurse. I want to make sure that I am that powerful voice that they can do anything that they want to be. You want to make sure that you live this life as happy as can be. And if you are happy in your career, you're not working a day in your life.
Yeah, I love that. The passion you have to give back in Women's History Month, empowering girls, empowering women. I think it's so important that is happening in the community. But to your point, coming from someone like you, and so I
Uh-huh.
just love that you have that intention. The times that I've seen you in the community, whether it's on Instagram or in person, and that's an intention for you that you just
Yeah.
shared, and so I think it makes me think about you being a woman in this industry. And you kind of talked about it a little earlier of like two women that could only be on the in the news or whatever the case may be. So along that journey, I guess I'm thinking, in the celebration of this month, like some of the women that maybe you have been able to look up to,
Uh-huh.
but also like that experience of maybe being the only because although our audience may not be the young kids who are watching a full, hour-long podcast, but maybe those, women who are young career, mid-career, whether they're in the news or not, like what that experience is like and maybe how they can keep going forward
Yeah.
when they recognize maybe I'm the only one here or there's only a few of us, that sort of thing.
I've always looked up to women like Janice Dean, the weather machine. She's a meteorologist. I've looked up to her. June Bacon Bursey. She
Okay.
was the first African American meteorologist. She was a woman meteorologist. She got her AMS seal at a time in the late 60s, early 70s
Love that.
when it was unheard of.
Right.
And June Bacon Bursey's from Wichita.
Okay.
She's from Wichita.
Wow.
She loved watching the clouds and just wanted to know how the atmosphere worked. And she went to Friends University, and then when she went to further her education, here she was. She had kids. She went to UCLA, and she became a meteorologist on TV in Buffalo, New York. And so,
Mm.
to watch her path and everything, and working for NOAA and all of these other, National Weather Service and all these other big entities. And at the core of it was she wanted to research, she wanted to understand what the atmosphere was. And the fact that she came from Wichita just made it even more so. But I would also say my mom too. My mom was, one of my biggest cheerleaders and
I love that.
supporters.
I
I
love
mean,
that. Nothing better than that support. That's
yeah,
powerful. So yes, if you're out there and you're like, "Am I gonna keep going? Can I do this?" You're looking at proof, and we've got so much of a behind the scenes view of the journey that it
yeah,
wasn't this, crystal clear, amazing. There was ups and downs
yeah.
to
It's
get to where you are, and so I think that's, I don't know, just helpful. It's helpful for women out there and just for professionals out there, young professionals, mid career, all in this STEM industry,
uh-huh.
trying to figure it out or trying to find what that next thing is.
Yeah.
That grader is out there.
And June Bacon Bursey, she moves all the way out to Buffalo, New York, and wants to do TV meteorology, and they don't give her the time of day until the one who was supposed to do the weather forecast, I think, was involved in some robbery or something
Oh,
like that,
wow.
and they said, "Here you go," and she
There she
she
went.
there she is.
I
That
love
was how
it.
she got her in, and she busted her butt to
It's
get to that
and
point.
that's what I'm hearing in a lot of your stories and what you're sharing, about others is the persistence
Yeah.
of saying, "You know what? It may have to happen a different way. It may have to come about a way that I wasn't expecting, but if this is something that I really want to do and pursue." And I think that's a great piece of advice for just anyone out there. No matter what you're trying to go for, it's like just stick with it,
Yes.
and when the opportunity arises, you're prepared for it.
Never let
'Cause she
anybody or anything stand in your way of
e
what you wanna do.
exactly, and I love that, like, when they gave her that opportunity, when it presented itself, she was
Yeah.
ready. It's not like the opportunity came and then, "Well, I don't know what to do." It's like,
Yeah.
no, 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 she was prepared, you
She
were
was
prepared,
ready.
you
She
know?
was ready.
So, I love that, that's amazing. Well, this is the STEM Music Podcast, and so we always gotta talk about some music. So we're
Uh-huh.
gonna pivot into the music section, and, I always ask, "What are your 2 favorite songs, maybe at the time, of all time?" I'm gonna listen to them, make some bullet points, we're gonna have a discussion. So I listened to both of your selections, and so I'll share some of what I thought, and then I'll ask why you picked this song.
Okay.
So the first one, "Out of Oklahoma," Lainey Wilson, and I did see that it was on the soundtrack for the new Twisters
Twisters.
movie.
Oh, that is such a good
I have to see
soundtrack.
it. I have to see the movie.
You
You
need
have
to see the
convinced me.
movie,
So
and you need to listen to the soundtrack because,
okay.
it gets going with, "Ain't No Love in Oklahoma" with Luke Combs, and then it goes into a song with Miranda Lambert. I mean, it's just really, really good
Imma have to do
music.
it. Imma have to do it. As a music lover, I'm definitely gonna have to check it out. And to be honest, tornadoes are a little scary. So I'm like, "Ooh," that's me with my storm anxiety of like, I don't know if I wanna go give myself nightmares, but if it's I trust that you're saying I need to see it, so I'm gonna
You
go
need to
see
see
it.
it. I think, everybody asks, "Do you like the first Twister movie or do you like the Twisters?" And they're both great in their own ways.
Mhm.
I remember when the first Twister movie came out because that was the year that I started my internship. And it
Okay.
was at a time when you didn't have radar on your phone,
Sure,
you didn't
sure.
have the WIAs. You had to know somebody at the National Weather Service or a TV station, and a lot of times you'd be chasing blue sky, and you
Mm.
would have to have the hand maps to go where you're going to go. And now you've got radar scope. You can see where other storm chasers are and all that kind of stuff. Some people may say that it takes a lot of the fun out of it, but I think it's just another tool, another way for us to be connected and also for us to be able to see what's happening with the
Yeah.
atmosphere. There's so much more about the atmosphere now that we didn't have 30 years ago. Last weekend, I was at the National um, Severe Storm Chasers Summit. It was in Kansas City. And you had this group that got up in the evening that, you had these two brothers, right?
Uh-huh.
One studying meteorology, one that just graduated with a degree in engineering. They built their own drone that had GPS coordinates that coincided with the Doppler on wheels, the Dow,
Okay.
and they built weather instruments and they flew right into a tornado. And we got to see the video of them flying into the
Wow.
tornado. And you got to see the vortices when they actually, things cleared up inside the tornado. And back in 1996, when the movie Twister came out, you never even thought that something like
Wow.
that would happen.
Yeah.
But now we're finding out so much more about the atmosphere, and to be able to see that was just super, super cool. But also to be able to engage with other up and coming storm chasers and meteorologists, and there were kids that were middle school and high school that were like,
Oh,
I know you from X, I know you from
oh,
Instagram,
that's
and they're
so
taking
cool.
pictures, and I'm thinking, oh, this just warms my heart to see how this is going to go on, and how things are we're going to know even more about the atmosphere because of this next generation. So
That's so cool,
yeah.
and it just showcases once again your love of giving back and, them getting especially the young girls that were there, like, getting to
Yes.
see you. I mean,
Oh yeah.
that's so incredible. So this first song, though, "Out of Oklahoma" by Lainey Wilson, from the movie Twisters, I put soothing music. So when it started, I was like, "Ooh, this is very
Yeah.
soothing." Um, I put a bullet point that said, "Must face myself. I can't run from me." That was
Yeah.
something that also stuck out as well. It reminds me of my mom who says, "You can't take the Ohio out of her." So my parents are from
Uh-huh.
Ohio, and
Yeah.
so, thinking about her saying that in the song about Oklahoma. And then kinda like life reflection. I don't know, it was really, drawing that sense of reflection, of, just thinking about your story and that sort of thing. So why was that song important to you?
I think that it is an autobiographical song
Mm,
for me, in the fact that I've been to all of these different places. But you know what? You can never take the Kansas out of me. You never can. And a side story to that, I remember I worked with a consultant one time in West Virginia, and he was watching my tape back in the VHS tape days, and he stopped it and he said, "Lisa, lose your accent." And I said, "Lose my accent? I didn't think I had an accent." He says, "No, you do. It'll never fly in New York City." And I remember saying to him, and I looked at him right in the eye,
Mm.
and I said, "I don't want to work in New York City. I want to work in Wichita, Kansas."
Come
So
on!
guess who had the last laugh with that?
Y
It was me. It
you did.
really
I
was.
love that.
And I think that song is just, there's always home.
Mm.
And that song always will remind me of home. No matter where this business may take me,
Sure.
no matter where the good Lord says that you need to go, and the good Lord has helped to guide me, that there will always be home.
I love that. I love that, and shout out it's funny. I'm touring now and traveling different places, like, "Where are you from?" "Wichita, Kan" "Where?" Like, and I
Yeah.
love it. There's something about it, like, my sister was visiting, earlier this year, and, she was in town for the figure skating weekend, and we were having
Yeah.
such a great time, and she was just watching me in my home city now, this is home for me. She was like, "Roy T, you're gonna die here." And I was like, "Wow." I said, as much as maybe somebody hearing that would be offended or mad, or I said, "I'm not mad at that. If that's what
Uh-huh.
happens, if this is where God has me to be, to bloom, to succeed and soar, which is what I feel like has been happening, it's a city that's really grown on me and that I really enjoy." So I love hearing that you said that in West Virginia to that,
Yeah.
to that person. So the next song on here, man, I really love too because I've heard so many different versions of it. It
Yeah.
was, by the Reba McEntire.
Who's
Ama
my who's one of my idols too, I
Come
have to
on
admit.
now. Shout out to Reba. "Amazing Grace" slash "My Chains Are Gone." And so,
Yeah.
I put on here, "But for the grace of God go I." Amazing Grace is an amazing classic song. How faith in God can set you free from so many different things. It doesn't even necessarily have
Yeah.
to be such negative things, but just day-to-day things. I love the line, like a flood, his mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. Like, so visual, and the word flood too, when I'm thinking about like weather, I was like,
Yeah.
wow, like this is so cool. And then the last thing was something that really kind of came out, and I love, is like not just being saved once, coming to Christ, but he keeps saving me. And that's amazing grace. That's something
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for. To your point, on this journey we call life, where you're trying to do something or go somewhere or whatever, and maybe you're frustrated, or maybe you're like, I need to pick it up and start getting back to work again, or whatever. Wherever I find myself, I'm like, man, he just continues to show up and continues to save me.
Yeah. This song, my mom passed away a few days before Christmas in December of 2023, and
Mm.
it was unexpected. And we were all asked to basically pick a song. What songs are we going to use for her funeral? And my sister sang a beautiful Amy Grant song, and she had a recording of it. And my dad wanted that, and she wanted that too. And we also chose "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," the Martina McBride version, because mom always loved rainbows, and we thought that it was a great way for us to end the ceremony. And I've always been a fan of Reba McEntire, and for whatever reason, that song just brought me in. And it brought me in the fact that, my mom did so much here on earth.
Mm.
She sacrificed so much for me and my sister to achieve what we did. And that was her life's purpose. It was us girls. And and I think that that song just made me think that she has transcended to the next level,
Yes.
and that her chains are gone. Anything from this world is gone. And so that really puts me into that mode. But also, when you talk about the flood of love that she gave us, and how, even though she's, in the next step in this existence, and that we're still here, that we still keep pushing forward until we're all united once again. And so that's where that song
Ah,
comes from for me.
that is so powerful. And you know, I never met your mom, but I know I'm meeting pieces of her right
Yeah.
here in this conversation. And
Yeah.
so I offer my condolences. But I also say, I just want to say that I know you are shining her light
Yeah.
everywhere you
Oh,
go.
yeah.
I can feel
Yeah.
it here, and I know when you're on the news and in the community. And so, and I want you to speak her name if possible.
Yeah. Linda Duchok Teachman.
I
Yeah.
love that. Well, yes, continue to rest in peace, Linda, and thank you for all you did to raise a wonderful chief meteorologist, and someone who I know you're just carrying on her legacy. I can feel it, you know. Wow, that's beautiful. That's beautiful, and it's amazing the power of music to be able to connect us to our loved ones, to those special moments. And yeah, I resonate with that. I really feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. She was a wonderful person. And I think that I know that she's always with me,
Yeah,
and she's always going to be with my sister and my dad, and um and I know she's incredibly proud of everything that we've done.
yeah. She has to be. She has
Yeah.
to. I mean, you all are doing some amazing things. Well, thank you for sharing that moment too, and
Absolutely.
allowing us to experience her love through you and your stories. The next part in the podcast, may allow us to continue to celebrate her, and also celebrate the weather, that you love so much. So we have a segment in the podcast called the STEMusic Jingle, which is a newer segment in the podcast, and I just love it. And so when I asked you, I said, what's STEM word would you give us? What STEM word would you want me to try to tackle? And of course, you chose meteorology.
Well, it's going to be a hard one, that's for sure.
And
Are
I
you kidding
loved
me?
it. I loved it because I'm like, I don't want my guests to go easy on me. I want y'all to make me work. And so I said, man, I think this is going to be a fun one. So I'm hoping that I remember it, because the funny thing about this podcast is every time I get to the STEM music jingle, I may have written something, I may have sang a certain melody, and then I'm like, now what's on this card right here? But I think I might have it. I think I might have it. So this is meteorology, and then we're gonna jump to our final question. I actually have like a little mini story I'm gonna tell, which I think will be it's important to me, and I think will be very interesting for you. So here's meteorology. Let's do it. Meteorology, the study of weather and Earth's atmosphere. Meteorology, mathematical based profession with forecasting. Meteorology, incredible science that helps keep us safe. Meteorology, show love to the weather person and give them grace.
Oh, I love that.
Thank
Oh,
you.
wow, I love
I love
that.
the last line because I'm like I said, people always fuss at the meteorologist, and I'm like, give them some grace. They are human. They are working to make sure that we are safe, and just using the power of science and STEM to do that. So,
Well, and especially when it comes to snowfall totals. Oh my
which
goodness.
was something we should tell the audience as at the recording of this, as we get ready to close this episode out. We had to reschedule because of the weather. I thought that was so funny. I said, not me trying to get this interview that I've been so working hard to get, that she called me out on, rightfully so, because it had been years. Like, it had been years where I
yeah.
reached out and said, hey,
Yeah.
would you be on the podcast? And then all these years passed by. And then we finally have the date, and I said it would be the weather with the chief meteorologist. That's the thing that makes us reschedule. But I think it was right. It allowed us to, have more time to prepare and,
Yeah.
all the things. So yeah. But I hope I did it justice, the
I
word
think
that you chose.
I need to get a recording of that.
Okay, I can do that for you.
Because I think all meteorologists all across the whole entire world would be greatly appreciative of that.
Oh, yeah. That's my goal. Like I said, Ronell, that's my guy. We connected, and I'm always watching him in the morning. Al Roker. I mean, like I said.
6 degrees of separation. I brought Ronell to Wichita.
Okay.
Yes.
I did not
because
know that.
He and I worked together at KCTV5 in
There
Kansas City.
Oh my gosh. And he
Yep.
talked about that on the podcast. I
Yep.
did not know that.
Yep. And so we had an opening. And I think the opening had happened earlier in the year. And he says, I'm still under contract until the summer. And I think it was also meant to be.
Sure.
Because we never filled that. We didn't find the right person. And then I said, hey, we've got this opening. And it all worked out.
One quick mini story before the final question, which is just all about giving advice to the next generation and to those who may want to follow in the footsteps of weather. But weather is very integral to me being in Wichita.
Yeah.
So first, I think you'll be proud because I was paying attention to the weather. Okay, as a kid watching on KBC 9 News.
You have to pay attention to the weather and the planes, because the weather will kill you around here.
Right.
If you don't.
And it changes. We know it changes like this.
Don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes and it will change.
Boom. And so I'm applying to colleges for aerospace engineering.
Uh-huh.
I had applied to 4. I was Embry-Riddle, Daytona Beach. It's like it's always top 5 in aeronautical engineering, aerospace engineering. Ohio State, because my parents from Ohio, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and Missouri Rolla, because that's a really great engineering school. Those are my 4 choices. And something was like, hey, just round it out with 5. Look, I go to Wikipedia. I type in aerospace engineering degree programs. I go to the US section. I open it. All the colleges pop up. I'm scrolling down the list. I get to the W's, and I see Wichita State University. There was other, universities in the W section. I said, that's the city that's on the weather map down to the left when I watch the weather. Let me click on it. I see that it says air capital of the world. I'm like, what? Long story short, I end up here, and it really is all because of the weather.
Yeah.
Isn't that wild? Like, I was watching, every time I watched, because when you're in Raytown, Kansas City, Missouri area, you see the surrounding cities.
Yes.
And that is how I recognized Wichita as a city that was, close to, where I was growing up. So anytime I tell people the story of how I got to Wichita State, I always talk about the weather.
Well, and Wichita State is just such a wonderful school, period.
Yes. Go Shockers.
Yep. I'm Shocker all the way through. And of course for engineering too.
Yes.
It pained me to have to take my husband away
Oh.
from his degree in electrical engineering at Wichita State, because he had that full ride, and he ended up graduating from WVU Tech. And Wichita State. I mean,
Go Shockers.
I love my Shocks.
Go Shockers. But yeah, all because of the weather. I think that is so wild to me that is my story in life, is because I recognized a city that was on the weather. And that's how I got there. So anyway, we're going to wrap up and close with the final question. And that is simply, if you had advice, if you have advice to give to young girls or women, their mid, career, young professional career, we kind of talked about it already. But specifically as it relates to weather.
Yeah.
But, if somebody's like intrigued in that, what is something that you would, share with them of what they could be doing right now, or, how they could prepare to venture into that place.
Always seek out those people and those opportunities. And even if it's not weather, if it's
Mm,
engineering, for
yeah.
example, if you have an up and coming kid that loves airplanes and wants to become an engineer, by the way, seek out Roy,
Thank you.
talk
Sure.
about the career path that you need to do. And like I was in high school, I sought out those people and I spent a day and I was like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
Seek out those people as soon as possible. I see so many kids, and I hate to use the word kids, that will go through college and then they get into their first job in TV and they realize, I don't like the hours. I don't like the pay. I don't want to have to move across the country. And I'm like, well, why did you do it in the first place?
Yeah.
Because you pretty much went through the equivalent of an engineering degree in meteorology, and now you're not doing it. You're changing
Yeah.
gears after a couple of years. Why did you waste all that time and that effort if you weren't going to stay with it? And I think that's the reason why Dave prepared me for that. Back when I was in high school, I knew the hours. I knew what the pay was going to be like. I knew that I would have to move around and all that kind of stuff to get back to where I wanted to be. So seek out those people as soon as possible
That's
because you
powerful.
never know.
Yeah.
That could turn into a position, whether it's in college, out of college, or years down the
Years
road.
down the road. I love that full
Yeah.
circle connection, which I think is powerful, and that piece of advice is really powerful that, if you're wanting no matter, like you said, weather or something else, to find those mentors, to get that experience, and you just never know how that road will unfold in front of you and how it may come back to be a full circle moment. So,
Exactly right.
well, I'm so excited that we were able to do this. Thank you so
Yes.
much for taking the time to come on the STEM Music podcast. I think I got to learn so many things, STEM Music Nation. I know you learned some things, and it's just so great to honor you in Women's History Month and to hear your stories. To honor your mom. I mean, this has been such a great hour-long conversation with you.
Well, thank you so much. And I don't take a day of this for granted. I really don't. I'm incredibly blessed. I'm fortunate. I'm living my dream. I really am. And I have no regrets. Make sure that you have no regrets in life.
I love that. We love to see it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.